Grab this, Secretary. Try not to shoot yourself. The captain's voice dripped with mockery as he tossed a jammed rifle toward Nora Calder, certain she was nothing more than dead weight. In the chaos of battle, with bullets tearing through the air, laughter rose from those who believed the joke. But within moments, the laughter died. Nora's hands moved with impossible precision, clearing the weapon like second nature. And then, with a broken M4, iron sights, and 800 meters of dust and fire between her and the target, she dropped the enemy commander with a single shot. What they witnessed wasn't luck. It was the return of a legend they thought was gone forever. The desert has a way of burning silence into people. Every morning at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, long before the motor pool came alive with shouts and engines, Nora Calder stepped outside the command tent and let the sand sift through her fingers. It looked casual, the idle fidget of a clerk waiting for another monotonous day, but her eyes were far too focused for it to be a habit without purpose. She watched the grains lift and scatter in the dry wind, noting the drift, the subtle push of invisible forces. No one noticed and no one cared. To most of the 50 soldiers stationed here, she was just the quiet staff sergeant who filed their reports, logged the endless supply manifests, and kept communications tidy enough to satisfy command. Nora was the kind of soldier who blended into the background, disciplined, efficient, never drawing attention to herself. She typed faster than anyone else in the ops center, spoke rarely, and never complained about the blistering 120-degree heat. Her uniform was always clean, her boots laced tight, her posture precise. And yet, despite her orderliness, something about her presence carried weight, the kind you couldn't define, only feel. On her chest hung an old set of dog tags, edges worn smooth, numbers so faded they were nearly erased. No one ever asked why. In a place like Helmand, mysteries weren't a luxury. They were burdens best left untouched. For 6 months, Nora lived this rhythm. Wake before dawn, check the wind, file the reports, keep her head down. She was the dependable gear in the machine no one thought about until it stopped turning. If the soldiers noticed anything unusual about her, it was how she always volunteered for the tedious jobs. Walking the perimeter wire during midday heat, double-checking convoy schedules, recalibrating the comms when no one else wanted to crawl into the sweltering equipment shack. She did it without complaint, without seeking recognition. To them, that only reinforced the assumption. Nora Calder was a background player, someone safe to underestimate. And then there was Captain Daniel Kincaid. Kincaid was everything the recruitment posters promised. 6'3", broad-shouldered, square-jawed, built like a linebacker who had never lost a fight. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed command was his birthright, and most of the base went along with it. His voice carried over the noise of gunfire. His orders barked with a confidence that could bend hesitant privates into motion. He liked control, and he liked the image of himself as the savior at the center of every crisis. But Kincaid had no patience for people he didn't understand, and he understood Nora least of all. To him, she was an oddity, a soldier with a rank she'd probably earned on paperwork alone, taking up space in his war zone. He never said her name without a smirk, and he never missed a chance to remind the others she wasn't real combat. During a morning briefing, he made sure the whole room heard it. Sergeant Calder is our dead weight, but regulations say I need admin staff, so we make do. Laughter followed, nervous and awkward, the kind soldiers gave when they weren't sure if they were supposed to laugh or stay silent. Nora didn't react. She never did. Her eyes stayed on the papers in front of her, her face an unreadable mask. But inside, something coiled tight. Kincaid watched her like a hawk, as if daring her to speak up, to break her calm. When she didn't, he sneered, satisfied. To him, silence meant agreement, proof that his assessment was right. To everyone else, it only reinforced the idea that Nora was exactly what he said. A paper pusher, a ghost wandering the edges of a battlefield she didn't belong to. What Kincaid never noticed was how she scanned the map while he spoke, noting choke points and ridgelines with an eye far sharper than he realized. He never saw the way her gaze lingered on the comms intercepts, or how she adjusted her stance instinctively when the distant sound of gunfire shifted in tone. To him, those were accidents, irrelevant ticks of an unimportant sergeant. But war has a way of stripping illusions bare. And out here, in the unforgiving sprawl of Helmand Province, where the desert sun burned away every mask and every lie, Nora Calder's silence was not weakness. It was a warning. Kincaid just hadn't learned to hear it yet. War never announced itself politely in Helmand Province. It didn't knock. It didn't whisper. It screamed. At 1400 hours, the first mortars landed outside FOB Sentinel. The blast ripped through the dry desert air, showering dirt and shrapnel across the HESCO barriers. Sirens wailed, soldiers scrambled into defensive positions, and the base that had always felt too small suddenly felt like a coffin. The ground shook under the thunder of explosions, and through the haze of dust, the sound of small arms fire grew closer, more deliberate. The Taliban weren't probing this time. This was a full assault. From the comms tent, Nora Calder stepped out into chaos. She didn't run toward the shelter like many would have expected of a staff sergeant. Instead, she paused, not to freeze, but to listen. Above the rattle of AK-47 fire and the whoosh of incoming RPGs, she heard it. A single shot, then a second, deliberate, measured. A sound that didn't belong to the random spray of panicked insurgents. It was the low, cracked thump of a Dragunov sniper rifle. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowing toward the northeast ridgeline. She didn't need optics. She calculated distance by the delay between crack and thump. 800 meters out, northeast ridge, behind rocks. No one else noticed. No one else cared. Private Cole Ramirez nearly stumbled into her, his rifle clutched so tight his knuckles blanched under the dust. 19 years old, fresh out of boot, his face was still too boyish to belong on a battlefield. Fear flickered in his eyes, the kind he tried to hide but couldn't. "Sergeant, we need to get to cover," Ramirez shouted over the chaos. Nora's gaze stayed on the ridge. "There's a sniper out there, northeast, 800 meters. Tell Captain Kincaid to shift second squad 20 meters south before they get picked apart." Ramirez blinked. "How could you possibly—" "Just tell him." The young private nodded uncertainly and sprinted through the dust toward Kincaid. Nora watched, knowing what would happen before it did. Kincaid stood near the operations bunker, red-faced, barking into his radio for air support that wasn't coming. His presence was commanding, but his eyes betrayed the truth, panic tightening at the edges. When Ramirez relayed Nora's warning, Kincaid's face twisted in irritation. He waved the private away with a dismissive snarl. Advice from the secretary? Worthless. Seconds later, another Dragunov crack split the air. A soldier from second squad spun and fell, clutching a bleeding shoulder. Ramirez froze, horror on his face as realization dawned. Nora hadn't guessed. She had known. Inside the base, chaos grew teeth. Mortars rained down, machine guns rattled, and voices screamed over the radio. "Tower 3 is down. They're inside the wire." Kincaid grabbed Nora by the arm as she moved toward the supply bunker. His voice dripped venom even as sweat streaked his face. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You qualified on a keyboard, not a rifle." And then it happened. With an ugly sneer, Kincaid thrust a battered M4 into her hands. The rifle was fouled, dust-caked, jammed from their last patrol. He tossed it like an insult, like a punchline to a cruel joke. "Show us what the secretary can do," he spat. "Try not to shoot yourself." Nearby soldiers chuckled nervously. Even in the middle of hell, there was room for mockery when it came to Nora Calder. She caught the weapon smoothly, her expression unreadable. This moment is not unique to fiction. For decades, women in combat roles have faced ridicule sharper than enemy fire. Studies, testimonies, and battlefield accounts echo the same refrain. Underestimated, doubted, dismissed. Too often they are measured not by their training or potential, but by the weight of stereotypes. Support staff. Dead weight. Words that cut as deep as shrapnel, even when the battlefield demands unity. Yet in those very moments of dismissal, history has shown again and again that capability can erupt where it's least expected. The nurse who became a lifeline under fire, the radio operator who carried the squad out of an ambush, the mechanic who picked up a rifle and changed the tide of a firefight. Like them, Nora Calder was about to rewrite the assumptions carved into the minds of the men around her. As tracer fire streaked the night sky and flames licked at the HESCO barriers, Nora's hands moved with a speed that silenced the laughter. She dropped to one knee, fingers flying across the M4 like a pianist at a grand recital. Slap, pull, observe, release, tap, shoot. The sports drill, every soldier knew it, but few could execute under pressure. For her, it was second nature, done 1,000 times before. The rifle clicked back into readiness. Ramirez, who had circled back, gawked at her. How, how did you? She didn't answer. Her eyes were already on the ridge, already recalculating wind drift and shimmer through the desert heat. Around them, Kincaid barked orders no one followed, his voice cracking under the weight of a battle slipping out of his control. In that moment, the pressure cooker of FOB Sentinel revealed more than the enemy's firepower. It exposed the cracks in command, the dangers of arrogance, and the razor-thin line between survival and annihilation. And at the center of it all stood Nora Calder, the so-called secretary, who carried herself with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. What the others hadn't realized, not yet, was that the joke had already ended. The laughter had already begun to die when Nora Calder lowered her gaze to the battered M4 in her hands. Dust clung to every crevice, the receiver scarred from neglect. Most soldiers would have tossed it aside and demanded a replacement, but her eyes studied the weapon not with frustration, but with recognition, the way an old craftsman regards a damaged tool, still useful in the right hands. She crouched behind the sandbags, ignoring the chaos roaring around her. Mortars thudded against the base perimeter. Tracer rounds tore streaks across the smoke-filled air. Kincaid barked orders no one could hear, his voice cracking against the storm. And yet, in the middle of that noise, Nora found stillness. Her hands moved before her mind had to command them. Bolt locked back. Magazine ejected. Chamber cleared with a sharp, practiced jerk. The fouled casing popped free. Her fingers inspected feed ramps by touch, not sight. Each movement precise, fluid, impossible to mistake for inexperience. It was instinct. Ramirez, crouched beside her with wide eyes, forgot to breathe as he watched. Sports drill, she murmured under her breath. Slap, pull, observe, release, tap, shoot. It was the same ritual every recruit learned in basic, drilled into them until muscle memory took over. But the difference wasn't in knowing the steps. It was in executing them in the middle of hell, under fire, while the ground shook and men screamed and death pressed in from every side. Nora did it like she was back on a quiet range, like the bullets whizzing overhead were nothing more than flies buzzing against the summer air. Ramirez swallowed. Sergeant, you've done this before. Her response was silence, not denial, not confirmation. Just the steady rhythm of her breathing. When the rifle locked back into place, ready to fire, she didn't celebrate or smirk. She simply raised her eyes back toward the ridge. The ridgeline was a smear of haze and movement 800 meters away. Heat shimmered above the rocks, distorting shapes into mirages. To the untrained eye, it was chaos. To Nora, it was a puzzle with every piece in plain sight. She closed one eye, letting the world shrink down to the battered iron sights of the M4. No scope, no magnification, just her and the horizon. Most soldiers wouldn't have even attempted it. A shot like this was beyond foolish. The weapon wasn't built for it, the distance too great, the heat too unstable. The bullet would drift, tumble, vanish. But Nora Calder was already calculating. Wind, full value, right to left, 5 to 7 meters per second. Heat, distortion, 1 mil offset to compensate shimmer. Barrel fouled, spin degraded, adjust by half a degree high and right. Breath slow, steady, count the rhythm of her heart. Her world narrowed. The screams, the explosions, even the fear evaporated. There was only the target, the enemy commander, barely visible, shouting orders, his silhouette betraying discipline where the rest of the attackers were wild. He was the anchor of the assault. Remove him, and the tide shifted. Ramirez whispered, as if afraid to disturb the air itself. That's impossible. Nora didn't respond. Her finger rested against the trigger, not pressing, not rushing, just feeling. This is what mastery looks like. Not the arrogance of loud voices, not the bluster of size and rank, but the quiet union of body and mind. In every profession, whether soldier, surgeon, or pilot, there are those who transcend training into instinct. Thousands of repetitions, years of discipline, carved into the bones until motion becomes truth. Nora Calder represented that kind of mastery, the type dismissed by those who never looked beyond surface appearances. And yet, mastery alone wasn't enough. She faced an impossible equation: damaged weapon, extreme range, distorted visibility. Logic said it couldn't be done. But war doesn't always bend to logic. Sometimes it bends to will. She inhaled. The iron sights settled. Time slowed, stretching thin like glass. She could feel the beat of her heart in her fingertips, the weight of every grain of sand shifting in the breeze. She pressed the trigger with the gentlest pressure, letting it break like glass under her touch. The M4 bucked against her shoulder. A single shot cracked across the desert. 800 meters away, through dust and smoke, the enemy commander's head snapped back in a crimson mist. His body folded to the ground with finality. No theatrics, no drama, just the unarguable punctuation of death. For 3 long seconds, the battlefield didn't change. The Taliban still fired, mortars still landed, tracer rounds still lit the air. But those closest to the commander hesitated. The chain of command faltered. And hesitation is death in war. The defenders of FOB Sentinel began to push back, their panic tempered by disbelief, then by hope. Closer to Nora, silence fell heavier than gunfire. Ramirez gawked, his mouth open, words lost somewhere between awe and terror. He had watched it happen, seen her clear the rifle, line the sights, pull the trigger, and land an impossible shot no sniper with perfect gear would have dared. Kincaid stormed over, his face purple with rage that didn't quite hide the tremor in his voice. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Calder? That was luck. You'll waste ammunition, He cut himself off when he saw the expression in her eyes. Calm, detached. The eyes of someone who hadn't gambled, but calculated. The eyes of someone who had known exactly what would happen before the trigger broke. For the first time since arriving at FOB Sentinel, Captain Daniel Kincaid looked at Nora Calder and felt something he had never associated with her: fear. In that silence lies the real lesson. Authority often fears what it cannot control. Kincaid built his command on certainty, his size, his voice, his presence. Nora shattered that with one shot. She undermined every sneer, every insult, every assumption, not by shouting louder, but by acting with undeniable competence. And when competence meets prejudice head-on, it isn't just a victory of skill. It is a rebuke to the very structures that thrive on underestimation. Around them, soldiers began to murmur, some pointing toward the ridge, others glancing back at Nora like she was a ghost. Phones lifted, cameras clicked despite the ongoing firefight. Word was already spreading, even before the dust settled. The secretary just dropped an enemy commander at 800 meters with a broken M4. Ramirez whispered finally, almost reverently, "Who are you?" Nora didn't answer. She just reloaded, calm as ever, and turned her eyes back to the battlefield. Because one shot had changed everything. But the war wasn't finished yet. The last echoes of gunfire had barely faded when the sound of rotor blades tore across the sky. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Soldiers at FOB Sentinel froze mid-motion, staring upward. 2 black helicopters punched through the dust clouds, tilting in steep combat descent. They weren't the lumbering medevac birds or supply Chinooks the garrison was used to. These moved with predatory purpose, sleek and unmarked. No patches, no insignias, just matte black steel glinting under the Afghan sun. They hit the ground before the base could catch its breath. Ropes dropped, and shadows slid down with terrifying speed. Operators clad in dark kit, weapons slung tight, helmets bristling with optics. They flowed like liquid, securing the perimeter in seconds. Ordinary infantry moved like men. These moved like inevitability. Ramirez's mouth went dry. "Delta Force!" Kincaid's bravado drained from his face. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Identify yourselves! This is my base! My—" No one answered him. They didn't have to. At their center strode a woman in polished combat uniform, silver stars glinting faintly against dust and smoke. She moved without hurry, but every step bent the space around her, as though the battlefield itself recognized her authority. Her gaze swept past Kincaid, past the dazed defenders, and locked on a single figure kneeling by the sandbags. Nora Calder, Colonel Adrian Knox. The name carried weight even whispered. A veteran of campaigns no one admitted publicly, Knox had built her reputation on ruthless precision, and in that moment, her attention belonged wholly to Nora. She stopped in front of her. The battlefield hushed, soldiers holding their breath, waiting for a command. But Knox said nothing at first. She simply looked down at Nora, eyes sharp, studying not the uniform nor the weapon, but the scar pressed deep into Nora's shoulder, the telltale mark of years spent behind a rifle stock. Finally, Knox spoke, her voice low but cutting. Coincidences like that don't exist. The words hung heavy. Kincaid blinked, confused. Ramirez glanced between them, trying to understand. Knox pulled a tablet from her vest, flicking through classified files with casual disregard for the dozen soldiers watching. Operation Blackwater, Helmand Province, 3 years ago. Reports of a sniper who held off 200 insurgents for 16 hours, covering a SEAL extraction, kill signature, identical to the shot made here today. She turned the screen for Kincaid to see, though his hands trembled too badly to focus on the data. The world thought that Sniper died when her position was overrun. But I don't believe in ghosts. Her gaze snapped back to Nora. Do I, Spectre? A ripple went through the watching soldiers. Spectre, a name whispered in barracks stories, the kind of legend young privates half believed, the kind veterans never fully dismissed. The sniper who could bend distance into submission, the phantom who appeared only long enough to turn battles before vanishing again. Ramirez inhaled sharply. You're... her? But Nora's expression didn't change. Her hands tightened slightly on the M4, eyes fixed on the ground. I'm Staff Sergeant Calder, she said evenly. That's all. Knox's lips curved into something between amusement and challenge. You can pretend all you want, Sergeant, but you don't make an 800-meter shot with a fouled M4 unless you've lived in that world. And you have. You were Spectre. Kincaid staggered back, face pale. He whispered the name like a curse, disbelief warring with humiliation. Only hours ago he had mocked her as dead weight. Now faced with the truth, he looked small. A man stripped bare in front of his soldiers. Nora stood, squaring herself before Knox. Dust clung to her uniform, sweat cut streaks down her face, but her posture was iron. With respect, ma'am, I left that life behind. I requested discharge. I buried Spectre 3 years ago. Knox's eyes softened just enough to suggest she'd heard this refrain before. And yet here you are, still checking wind every morning, still carrying those worn tags, still calculating trajectories without even realizing it. You didn't bury her, Nora. You just tried to forget. I chose to forget, Nora snapped, the calm cracking for the first time. Around them, the base seemed to shrink, soldiers leaning in to catch every word. I've spent 3 years in silence, 3 years trying to be someone else. I'm not her anymore. Knox studied her, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Nora could hear. You don't get to walk away from being who you are. The enemy already knows. That ambush wasn't random. They came here to see if Spectre was still breathing. And now they know the truth. The weight of those words pressed down on Nora like a new set of chains. She glanced at Ramirez, his eyes wide, filled with both awe and fear. Then at Kincaid, whose pride had shattered into something closer to shame. Everywhere she looked, soldiers stared at her differently now. Not as a secretary, not as dead weight, as something both greater and more dangerous. She wanted to deny it, to walk away, to disappear again into anonymity. But the battlefield didn't care about what she wanted. Knox straightened, voice hard again. You don't have to like it, Sergeant, but legends don't get to choose when they're called back, and you've just been called. For the first time in hours, Nora Calder felt something colder than fear. Resignation. The ghost had returned, whether she wanted it or not. The dust hadn't even settled when Colonel Adrian Knox pulled a slim black folder from her vest. No markings, no insignia. Only the red band that screamed classified. She held it out to Nora like an offering, or perhaps a sentence. Operation Silent Storm, Knox said. Her voice carried over the quiet murmurs of the soldiers gathered around, each one straining to catch every word. This isn't just another mission. It's the reason you're here, the reason they hit Sentinel, and it's why I can't let you vanish again. Nora hesitated before taking it. The folder felt heavier than its size suggested, as though every secret inside had physical weight. She opened it slowly. Photos, maps, signal intercepts. At the center of them all, a single name repeated like a curse. Khaled al-Rashidi. Her chest tightened. She remembered the name from years ago, whispered in after-action briefings, half buried in intelligence chatter. Rashidi, a former Pakistani ISI officer, trained in Western doctrine, who turned his knowledge against the very people who had once trained him. He knew American playbooks, knew how units moved, knew how to bait them into ambushes they never saw coming. Knox's voice cut into her thoughts. We've tracked him for 6 months. Every time we move, he's a step ahead. Every time we set a trap, he's already waiting. He's not guessing, Calder. He knows. Nora flipped through the documents, her pulse quickening. Photos of burned-out convoys, names of soldiers lost in ambushes that shouldn't have been possible. At the bottom of one page, a name jumped out at her. Blackwater, Helmand Province. The very operation where she had disappeared 3 years earlier. Her fingers went still. He was there, she whispered. Knox nodded grimly. Not just there, he orchestrated it. The ambush wasn't designed to wipe out a patrol. It was designed to bury you. And when no one saw you again, we assumed they succeeded. So did he, until today. The realization hit with the force of another mortar. The assault on FOB Sentinel, the timing, the sniper fire, none of it random. It was bait, a test, a way to draw out the phantom sniper rumored to still exist. And Nora, against every instinct to stay hidden, had revealed herself with one impossible shot. They know now, Nora said quietly. Her voice was flat, stripped of denial. They know Spectre is still alive. Knox's eyes softened with something like sympathy, but her words carried steel. Which means they'll come for you, again and again. You can't hide, not anymore. You've been exposed. The soldiers around them shifted uncomfortably. Ramirez looked at her with awe, as if standing next to living history. Kincaid couldn't meet her eyes at all, his face pale and slack with shame. Nora closed the folder and held it to her chest. For years she had tried to live as someone else. The quiet sergeant behind a desk, the anonymous gear in the machine. She had thought anonymity would give her peace. Instead, it had left her trapped in half-truths, carrying memories like unhealed wounds. Her hand drifted to the dog tags under her uniform. For 3 years they had been tucked away, hidden against her skin, their numbers worn almost smooth. She pulled them out slowly, holding them up in the harsh Afghan light. Nora S. Calder. Blood type O negative. TF-88. The tags gleamed faintly, not as relics, but as reminders. Every eye followed the motion as she slipped them back over her neck, letting them fall against her chest where they belonged. The weight was both crushing and familiar, the gravity of an identity she could no longer deny. In that moment, Nora Calder stopped being the quiet secretary, the dead weight mocked in briefings. She was once again Spectre, the ghost sniper, the legend thought lost. And though she hated the inevitability of it, she also understood. This wasn't about choice anymore. This was about unfinished war. Knox gave a short nod, as though the gesture of reclaiming the tags had been the only answer she needed. Welcome back, Spectre. The storm's already moving, and you're the only one who's faced him and lived. Nora exhaled slowly, her eyes drifting toward the ridgeline where the enemy had vanished hours before. Dust still hung in the air, mixing with the smoke of burning vehicles. Somewhere out there, Rashidi knew she lived. And somewhere, deep inside her, a part of her long buried stirred awake. The part that had never truly left the fight. The battlefield had claimed her once more. And this time, there would be no going back. Stories like Nora Calder's resonate because they are not just about war, they are about life. In the chaos of a battlefield, she was mocked, underestimated, and nearly discarded as dead weight. Yet when the moment came, her quiet preparation and unshakable discipline carried her farther than anyone expected. That lesson extends beyond uniforms and rifles. How many of us, in our own lives, have been treated the same way? Perhaps at work, where your ideas were ignored until someone else repeated them. Maybe in your family, where your strength was overlooked because you didn't shout the loudest. Or even in the community where age, gender, or background made people assume you had nothing left to contribute. In America today, that story is universal. People are still misjudged for being quiet, for being different, for not fitting the image others expect. Nora's return as Spectre teaches us something simple but powerful. True strength doesn't always announce itself. It builds in silence, it sharpens in patience, and when the world finally tests it, it reveals itself with undeniable clarity. That is as true in a boardroom or a classroom as it is in combat. But there's another layer here, and one I want you to reflect on. Nora reclaimed her old dog tags, but was that victory, or was it a new burden? Did she win back her identity, or did she lose the chance to live in peace? Heroes in our stories often pay a price, and it's worth asking, what would you have done in her place? Would you step back into the storm or walk away forever? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove people wrong? And do you think Nora made the right choice in accepting the return of Spectre? Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you found meaning in it, if it stirred reflection or reminded you of moments in your own journey, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. This channel is dedicated to sharing stories that go beyond the surface, stories of hidden strength and quiet resilience. Because sometimes the most powerful legends are not the ones who shout the loudest. They are the ones who rise when no one expects them to.